Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to this Senate bill. It's about, quote, zero-based budgeting. That is a flashy policy term that it's meant to describe skepticism. Skepticism that government has any legitimate purpose, and the presumption that all discussions about government spending should start from the assumption that there should be no government spending. That's what zero base means. Now, it may make sense if you were in a state that had a bloated budget with a lot of unnecessary expenditures, if we were one of those liberal states, right, or something like this, I don't know, to maybe take a look and see if the expenditures that we were making with billions of dollars of taxpayer money really suited the ends of government. But we are not in such a state. We are in a state that has been variously described as fiscally responsible, fiscally conservative. Let's be clear about what these euphemisms mean. We live in a state with a starvation budget. We live in a state where the per capita government expenditure per person is something about, I think it's the bottom quintile, the bottom 20% of states nationally. Now, there are a couple areas where maybe, the way we pay teachers or education spending, maybe that stat's a little bit better, but across the board, we are underfunding our government in such a dramatic way. People will throw around billions of dollars around here like that's a lot of money, but on a day-to-day basis, our people are getting very little service delivery back for the amount of taxes that they spend. And why is that? It's because we're not putting our agencies in a position to succeed. Very often in this chamber, you will hear complaints about the unresponsiveness of state government as if that's some problem that adheres to government, as opposed to a failure to pay people for their work and to pay enough people. I mean, gosh, y'all know what's happening in the House right now? There's a bill to kill the enforcement division for securities law under the Secretary of State. Are y'all aware this is happening? There's only 3 attorneys in that unit, the Securities Enforcement Division in the House, and there's a very cynical attempt to move that Securities Enforcement Division to Banks and Finance, the department, so they can kill the First Liberty investigation. Were y'all aware this was happening? Yes, check that House bill out. If they pass it, I'm sure we'll be talking about it in here. But that's just one small example of the way that state government is already doing a yeoman's effort with very little budget to try to produce public goods, to try to hold power accountable and empower the people of Georgia. But state government is doing this with both arms tied behind its back. And the people of Georgia are being told that the way for them to achieve real affordability is for the governor to shoot $250, $500 back at the end of the tax year. Folks, you don't even notice that. If you do your TurboTax, you hardly even recognize that you've gotten a state rebate. So let's get very real about what Republican leadership for 20 years in this state has meant in terms of budgeting principles. It means pretend government is bad, pretend government doesn't do anything, try to give people their tax money back at all possible opportunities, even if that tax money barely pays a quarter of your rent for the month, and doesn't do anything to address the crises in behavioral health and prisons. I mean, gosh, can we talk about the fact that gang violence, which Brian Kemp has railed against for years, starts from inside prison walls? It starts from inside the prisons where gangs are allowed to run free because the Department of Corrections hasn't been given the resources that it needs to stem gang violence before it can spill over in our communities. We have all these bleeding open wounds of problems in the state of Georgia, but the governor all the way down, Republican leadership wants to pretend that it's business as usual, that it's hunky-dory. Do you know some made-up magazine has said that we're the #1 state to do business for about 875 years in a row? And every Republican leader in this state goes up to a speaking opportunity and says, well, we got to maintain our status as the #1 state to do business. That's completely made up. Folks, we've got people making up stories about what Georgia's really going through, and the reality is that we're starving. The reality is that we can't afford health care. The 200,000 people have lost health care since the holiday season. And the underfunded schools, the schools that aren't performing, that suffer from a lack of investment by parents, those schools are not getting bailed out. Instead, we're being told vouchers are the solution. We're being told that those schools have to be underfunded even more. So there are crisis-level conditions across the board in every major policy area in Georgia. We are in the bottom quintile of spending to address it. But then what we get when it's time to discuss the budget is a very genteel presentation about how we need to do fiscally responsible budgeting that starts at zero-based. Calgary did a study of zero-based budgeting. folks don't really do it. People like saying the word zero-based, and then they do some sort of multiple choice option where they pick between services instead of actually go to zero. Even the phrase zero-based budgeting is a very thin cover for the fact that both Republicans and Democrats behind closed doors in these ante rooms agree that we got to pay for what we get, that you don't only get what you pay for. But in public, they want to act like government needs to be drowned in a bathtub because that has been the ideological trajectory of the Republican Party for the last several decades. Well, Grover Norquist is not elected in the state of Georgia, and he shouldn't control your minds. Government needs to be funded at a level that is commensurate with the services that a modern civilized society requires. That means people not dying in the streets. It means people walking into emergency rooms and being able to get care, but long before they walk into those emergency rooms, they get a primary care visit so they can address the conditions that they have from square one. I've been hopping around different policy areas because the problems are that vast. So today I ask that my colleagues reject this thinly veiled attempt to justify further cuts to our budget, to justify $3, $6, $9 billion worth of income tax cuts in this chamber, or if the House Republicans can find 20 more Democrats to buy off, which they won't be able to find 20, then maybe they could get their constitutional amendment to eliminate all homestead property taxes. But there is a run on the bank, folks. There is a run by Georgia Republicans in an election year when they're out of ideas to go run and dismantle the very levers of government at its most basic level, and it is being disguised as fiscal responsibility and zero-based budgeting. The Democratic Party's had enough. We are here to present an alternative in 2026 that believes that government can accomplish basic things for people who need it, for working people. And we don't think that state government is the enemy. And we don't think that we need to defund state government at every turn just to give you pennies back on your TurboTax. There's a different model and vision for government that is possible if only we have the courage to follow in that direction. Colleagues, I appreciate your time. I urge you to vote no, and I'll yield for questions.
You do have a question. Chair recognizes the senator from the 46th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I do.
So if you're on appropriations, you realize that the big, thick 400-page book we get every year only includes additions or subtractions from the previous year's budget, right?
That's right.
So this technique is the only way we really know what's underneath the surface there, what's below the tip of the iceberg, what every dollar is that we're spending. So how could we possibly know if we're spending responsibly or enough, as you seem to think we're not budgeting enough, without knowing where those dollars are going?
So I think context matters, Senator, and I'm not saying that universally at all times that this alleged budgeting technique would always be a problem. But I think the context of a starvation budget in the state of Georgia matters. And I think, an analogy might be that if somebody hadn't eaten in 2 weeks and we're on the brink of death and they're, in an alleyway laying against a wall, and you walk up with an expensive x-ray machine and you say, well, we'd just like to do some imaging because we're not quite sure, what's going on under there. No, that person needs a bowl of soup or something. They need a glass of water. They need some help because their basic needs are not being met. And so this sort of elaborate narrative about, popping the hood and looking underneath to see what we've got, we're down to skin and bones already. So we don't need the expensive imaging to, quote unquote, see what's underneath until we have met the basic needs of the state. Senator.
Senator, further yield for one last question. So there's nothing about this bill that requires us to cut back spending or to limit spending or go bare bones. It just lets us know what we are spending in each area of government so we can see if we're adequately funding, what type of imaging machines we're offering, how many employees in the certain department, right? I mean, it's still incumbent on us to decide, but it gives us more information informing the budget to see spending from ground zero, from the first dollar up until that thick 421-page book begins.
Well, Senator, this is the same sort of rhetorical device that was used when we passed the income tax bill recently, which was there are no cuts in this bill. This bill doesn't have any of the cuts. Yes, but it's all part of a context. It's all part of the same conversation, and words matter. Our words matter, and if they didn't, then you and I and everybody else in this room would be out of a job. Because I don't lift weights as well as some of my friends do, but we do deal in words, and words define our reality. In this case, the words zero-based budgeting means that we assume that the budget should be zero. That's just what it means. And that is an approach to budgeting that engenders skepticism and mistrust of a state government. It's a way of signaling to the public that they should not trust their state government and they should drown it in a bathtub. When the press releases go out and the email blasts happen and the majority in this chamber celebrates the passage of zero-based budgeting principles, the message to the voters that read those emails and press releases will be, you should presume that every dollar that we spend in state government is illegitimate, that it's illegitimate, that we should not be spending it. And so we have a different vision in the minority party for how government should work. It should be that we aspire for state government to meet the most basic needs of working people, rather than going into every budgeting conversation assuming that every dollar we spend is illegitimate. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
No further questions, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes